So you want someone to finally read your book, but you don't know how and you don't know when, and you're really, really scared. Well, you're in the right place, because I'm going to tell you my experience and some of the things that I think and I've learned along the way to help you feel more confident about critique partners, alpha readers, beta readers, when to do it, how to do it, all that stuff. So stay tuned and let's talk. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about something that I feel like all of us really have like so many questions about, we're so like worried about, and everyone has like a difference of opinions, or we're not really quite sure what to do. Like, what are critique partners? What are beta readers? Are there alpha readers? What are those? What are those? Right? So what I kind of want to talk about is my experience. That is what this video is. This is not an advice. This is not whatever. This is literally my experience with getting feedback from readers in various ways, and what I've kind of learned along the way, and how I like to go about it now after having learned that. So you can hear my experience and maybe take what you want from it. And also please contribute down below your thoughts, what you've done similarly, differently, etc. Okay? So what I want to do first is kind of just give a little bit of a background with my experience with feedback with my writing. So the first time I ever really, besides like when you're a kid and you're writing stuff and you're like, mom, brother, you know, read this. Real like feedback from other writers and readers was when I was taking creative writing classes in college. And those of you who did take those classes, you know the drill. You basically write some pages, you give it to everyone in the class, and then they just comment. And the comments are just whatever. They're just like, what, I mean, maybe your instructor like streamlined it, but I had different instructors at different schools, and they all kind of just did the same thing, where it was like, write a paragraph, write in the margins. And it was just like, it was just kind of all over the place, right? Like sometimes you'd get people doing like a sort of reader response, a beta read, or you'd get some people who are really trying to like critique the writing. But most of the time it was more just like, this is dumb, this is stupid, this doesn't make sense, I'm bored, like that kind of stuff. I didn't find it very fruitful until I was in the upper level courses. Now I was a minor in creative writing, so I didn't take a lot of the upper level, but I was required to take, I don't know, 2 or 3, and that's where like people are really taking it more seriously. And so I definitely, sorry, I'm like, my seasonal allergy, it's not corona. My allergies are really bad in my asthma. So the feedback got better, but I don't know, it was just, there was no like rhyme or reason to like what people were saying, and it was all short stories, and I don't know. It just wasn't like the best feedback, but that was my first like experience with it. So I just thought that's like what you did, right? Like you wrote some stuff, and then when you were done with the project, because these were all short stories, then you present it, tell you whatever they feel like, you know? So that was my first experience. Then I kind of just took some time off of writing. I was doing academic writing instead. And then when I got back into fiction, I took a course with Francesca Leah Block. And her class was basically the same. It was much smaller, more intimate. And of course we got feedback from her, which is like amazing. I mean, if you don't know who Francesca Leah Block is, who are you really? You know? And so there was like, she kept them really small and intimate. They were in her home. It was like an amazing experience. I've talked about it a million times. But there was like, I think 5 of us. And so we would send our pages, and this was out of a larger project, but she just had to start from the beginning basically. And I think it was like somewhere between 5 to 15 pages. Maybe it was 15 or 20. I don't know, but it was like, you know, it was a good chunk. And we had a week. And again, though, it was just reading and feedback. It was just whatever they thought, whatever they felt. Francesca, her feedback, I felt like, of course, because she's a seasoned writer, was a lot more, and she like writes in a little bit more of the vein of the kind of fiction that I do. She's written young adult and fantasy and that kind of stuff. So she did give, there were some pieces of advice. I might do a video on that, like what I learned from taking a class. That would be a cool video. Yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. But she did give some great advice. But the rest of the people in the group, again, were just kind of like, I mean, these were people who took it seriously. Obviously, they're taking a class with Francesca, which costs a lot of money, and they know who she is. So like, these were people who cared about their writing for sure. But I don't know, again, it was just kind of like word vomit of what you think of the book. So that was my experience. So after that class, Then I continued to work on that project. It was my first book that is speculative fiction that I hope to get back to one day because I have so many good ideas. Even though I know those books don't sell, I'm really excited about my idea, so I will go back to it. But anyway, so that was the project I had been working on for, you know, a couple of years at that point. And I joined I was a part of this website that had like message boards. I can't remember what it's called. Some of you might know it. Where you like talk to people on these message boards about writing. It was kind of before there was a big following on AuthorTube or Twitter, like to talk to writers. And they had this thing where they called it like you got beta readers, which again, I feel like people are just using these terms like as like a catch-all. And so you could say what your book was about and then they would read it and give you feedback. I mean, again, standard way. You see the point, you see where I'm going with this, right? That there didn't seem to be any like focus on what these things mean or what is expected of people. And so I had finished my first draft and I did not go through and edit it at all. I mean, these were huge rookie mistakes, and sent it to 2 people who were interested in reading it, besides my brother, Kevin. And so the one person gave me like, you know, some good feedback, but I just remember the other person just tore it up, basically told me it was horrible. It was like not good at all. Like everything I wrote was just not good, that I should like give up on the story, give up on writing, give up on life. I mean, maybe it wasn't that bad, but that's how I remember it. So again, it was just like whatever they felt like saying about it, they just gave it to me. So it was a lot of like, this is crappy, this is, you know, whatever. I don't like this, I like this. It was just, I don't know. It was just like all over the place. So that has always been my experience. It has always been my experience that you finish a project, then you give it to people to read, and they just give you whatever feedback they feel like giving you. So that was just how I've always worked. So moving forward, I shelved that book because it was a lot to take that, and I knew there were some things that just needed fixing and I wasn't there yet on how to fix it. I know it now, mostly, but, and then I started working on Beware of Monsters, which is what I'm working on still, because I started working on this back then and then took a couple of years off and then came back to it. But I never had anyone read it. So I worked on it for like a year and then I put it aside for a while, and didn't write for a while. And then I came back to it about a year and a half ago. So it was NaNoWriMo of not last year, but the year before. So what is that, 2018? Yeah. Came back to it to like completely rewrite it. And I've been basically working on it since then with nobody reading it. None. Because it's always been, you finish the project and then you give it to people to read and they give you feedback. The only person I will say that has seen like, and I would not say read it. I might be like, read this paragraph, or can I read this sentence to you? Or what do you think about this idea? And that was to my husband. He's very brilliant, he's creative, and he's so smart. But I would call that, you might have heard it, an alpha reader. And that's where they read just like the raw, you haven't edited, you don't know what's going on with it, you haven't polished it in any way. And usually people only do that with like, people that are extremely close to, and it's in very small sections. Like I would just be like, hey, can you read this intro paragraph? Like, does this make sense to you? Like, or I'm thinking about doing this. Should I take this sentence out? Does this do this? That kind of thing, right? So I guess you could call that an alpha reader because they're reading the very first, or like what a lot of people are now referring to as your 0 draft. It's like having someone read a part of your 0 draft, but not even the whole thing. Just like, hey, what do you think of this dialogue here? You know? But that was it. And it was just my husband. So like I didn't have anyone like reading it, and that's just how I was doing things. But I have over time, just like I've been overthinking. I mean, I've been working on this book now for like a year and a half, like consistently, not counting the time, the first version, because I completely rewrote. I mean, the character's not even the same, like, so, but again, not having anyone read it because I have not gotten a polished, I do not want to give a first draft to anybody ever again, because that just, it almost killed my spirit forever, to be honest, my writing spirit. It was rough. And so, yeah, so I just had been, you know, waiting to finish this project. I kept thinking, oh my God, I would love to get feedback, but I was like so long before I'm ready, but I can't send someone a rough draft. Like that's so terrible and I don't want to get ripped apart. And then, you know, during this time I joined AuthorTube, and some people started talking about this idea of like critique partners and beta readers. And I remember being like, what's the difference? Like, isn't it all the same thing? Like, you just finish your project and have people read it and they tell you whatever they want to tell you about it. But then a couple people started doing videos about it, 2 in particular that were very, very helpful to me. I will link, I don't know if I can find their actual videos because it was like over a year ago, but I will link their channels in the description. My friend Lindsay Puckett, and then also my friend Emily Bourne. So both of them did videos talking about critique partners and more specifically beta readers. And this is when I started to understand like the difference. And both of these women, like, feels weird to say women, but I don't want to say girls. Both of these chicks, both of my friends, whatever you want to call them, really talked about having a streamlined reading for beta readers. So rather than letting beta readers mark all over your paper, do whatever you want, it's about the reading experience with your pointed questions. So like, okay, like maybe they read this so many chapters and then you have questions for them, like, what did you think about this thing, or how did, you know, do you feel like you know this character well enough, or like, do you care about this character, you know, those kind of things that you would want to know how a reader, not a writer, which I know they could be the same, but it's like the reading experience. And I was just kind of like, huh, so I could get the answers that I want. So then I started thinking about critique partners, right? Well, what again? So then I was like, okay, I'd never used critique. I thought they were synonymous, right? So it's like, okay, so if you're doing that though, but then you're never getting like the developmental stuff. You're never getting someone digging in or giving you suggestions, or, you know, maybe commenting on the sentence structure or whatever it is that you're looking for in like the critique. So I was like, okay, I'll get the reading experience, but like, what if I want like the chunk stuff? And then I started, you know, and then I listened to what they were saying, what other people were saying. I was like, and it started to formulate in my head the difference between a critique partner and a beta reader. The critique partner is someone who reads your work in the writing stage, not a finished version, and helps you, I guess, kind of like, the way to think about it is like developmental edits, suggestions about actual, like the writing of it. It's hard sometimes to explain the difference between that and the reader experience, but hopefully as writers, you know what I mean. Like, how you receive something as a reader is very different than how you're reading it as a writer to critique it. Hence, critique partner, right? And so, the other part of that though, was that, and I know you don't have to do this, and I know not everyone does this, but this is my experience and what I got from this and what kind of led me to go in a different direction on how to do this for myself, is that most people have critique partners along the way. It's not you give them a finished product, because they're helping you in the process of writing the book. So I was like, huh, okay, so it's kind of taking what I've always had, which is a class or whatever. Well, only Francesca's class was like that. Everything else was completed projects. But it's kind of taking what Francesca had, which was reading a little bit at a time and giving suggestions. But then you also will get people later to read the final product rather than having the critique partner again. I mean, maybe you do, but you know what I'm trying to say. To get different kind of feedback on the book as a whole, on the characters as a whole, as the reading experience, as opposed to writing. So I thought, well, should I send some of my book to someone to read? Now remember, I was really scared because I sent a first draft to somebody and they nearly made me stop writing forever. So I started thinking about it and I was like, well, my first act is not a first draft. I have revised my first act at least 4 times. Now, that doesn't mean it's in a final draft stage. Definitely not. But I've been slowly refining it because I've been changing some ideas, changing some character things, changing some settings of some stuff of where certain beats happen, like especially after I read Save the Cat, which if you have not read, it will definitely change your book. I have that linked in my description. Check that book out if you haven't. So Save the Cat Writes a Novel made me kind of rethink a lot of things. So I had gone over that probably about 4 times. So I was like, well, you know, I'm working on Act 2. Act 1 is at this point, even though I revised it 4 times, I would call this my version 2, if that makes sense. So I have a full, what I consider a version 2, not a first draft, or for version 1, done, and I'm working on version 2. So I don't know, maybe I could just send the first act to someone and get some feedback. So then you have to ask, okay, well, who do you ask for these things, right? So I started thinking about, okay, if I want someone who's going to give me like developmental, digging in on the writing of this, it shouldn't just be like, now again, my experience, this was my thought process, you can do things however you like. But I was just thinking, I just don't want you to just be like my friend, you know? Like, I feel like it's someone who, I wanted it to be someone who I felt like, felt the same way I do about writing. And what I mean by that is, I know we all, if we're here, love writing and whatever, but I mean like, they think about it similarly, they take it as seriously as you do, and I don't, they approach it the same is what I'm trying to say. That you feel like you guys are similar enough and you trust them enough, and you think that they are capable of giving you that kind. And so it just wasn't something I wanted to just ask straight up strangers. And again, my experience, because I wanted to know what kind of stuff they write, how they approach writing. Are we similar? Would their suggestions even make sense to me? Because if we're not writing on the same level, then, and I don't mean level as like higher or lower, but like the same kind of writing and the same approach and style and thoughts about it and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like there needed to be like a compatibility thing there, and also someone I trusted, and then also someone who was willing to put in the time, because it's different than beta. Beta reading is just like reading a book and then saying what you think about it. But this is someone who's really thinking about the craft of your writing when you do a critique parter. And so this is time consuming. So I ended up asking my friend Cassidy, which, hi Cassidy, she had said before that she was willing to read, and Kevin was being a jerk and didn't want to read it because he's still stuck to those old ideas that he wants to wait until it's a finished project. Yeah, that's right, Kevin, I'm putting you on blast. You should be ashamed. Anyway, I'm glad I did it this way because I needed someone who didn't know anything about the story anyway. I wanted them to be completely divorced of it. Kevin has heard me talk about it a million times. He knows a lot of the aspects of it. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna have Cassidy read it because she really doesn't know anything about it, but I trust her, I know her. You know, she went to school for writing. We've talked about this a lot. I understand her. I feel like we're on the same like wavelength, right? So I sent it off to her. It was about 45 pages because again, I underwrite. This is why I had gone through it like 4 times already and it's still underwritten. But it was about 45 pages or so. So I sent that off to her and I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep reading or keep working on my act 2. So I did that, and it took her maybe like a week or 2, and then she sent it back, and I was like so nervous. And I saw these comments, and I was like, oh my God, I can't take it, I can't take it. So like I wouldn't look at it, and then like a few days later, I finally went back, looked at them, and you guys, chef's kiss, okay? Because it was so, what was really great, I felt like, for me, was that Cassidy didn't really try to steer anything in any direction. She didn't say like, you should do this, which I think could be good if people have good suggestions. But what I liked was she just asked questions that opened up my thoughts, like, why am I doing it like this? Or, yeah, I didn't think, you know, or she would say something like, well, how come this hasn't come up before? And I was like, you're right. How come it hasn't come up before? Right? Things that I just hadn't thought of that I needed the answers to. And ultimately her comments and suggestions, which were great, there was nothing mean, so I appreciate that, Cassidy, but they were still constructive, and she still like really pushed some questions out there that were just like, yeah, but what about this? Like, or are you going to explore this? Or, you know, are you concerned about this? Like that kind of stuff. And it was absolutely perfect for me. And it really just got me out of this writing funk, and it re-energized me to work on my book. And so this is what I got kind of out of it was, you need to have people read your book in the process, because she made me think about things that are going to affect the entire book. So I now can have that in mind as I'm continuing to revise, so that I don't have to go, because then I'm not going to be overwhelmed, because this change is going to affect everything in the book. So if you're not getting that suggestion till the end of the project, then you got to go through the whole book again and change it. So I really liked having her just read that first chunk. So that's kind of how I'm going to do it moving forward. So she gave me it back, and from there, I just went to town. And you've seen on some of my previous vlogs, I'll link some stuff, just writing all kinds of comments, ways I can fix things, notes to myself to think about as I continue on towards Act 2. It is totally changing how I'm working on Act 2. And I love that it's come in right at that point where I'm still writing, where I can still make these decisions, and it's completely just, I don't know, it was like one of those things where I was just stagnant over a year, just working on this all in insulation, just having that outside perspective, that outside view, just outside thoughts. It just completely cracked my head open to new ideas, new thoughts, and new energy toward my book. So I'm so glad that I did that. And so my plan now is, she's already done Act 1 and I'm in the middle of writing Act 2. I'm in the fun and games. So what I'm gonna do is, once I get to the midpoint, I'm gonna send her that chunk and tell her any fundamental changes, because I'm not gonna give her back the first chunk again. If there were any fundamental like story changes, which there are gonna be a few that she needs to know to continue on, then I'll just tell her that in the email, like, hey, by the way, I changed this, this, and this so that you understand why things are happening this way now. And then I'm gonna get her feedback on that. So while she's reading that, I'm gonna go to the second part of Act 2 and write from the midpoint to the break into 3. And at some point she'll send me that. I'll stop, read through, write all my notes, think about all my things, make my plan again, and then continue on with that second part. Then when that's done, I'll do the same thing. Send it to her, move on to Act 3, wait till she gets the feedback. You guys get the idea. So yeah, so I think that doing that, getting the critique partner all along the way, making my changes, then going through it one more time with all those changes made, and then reading it all the way through, then I'm gonna give it to 2 more critique partners. And I think that in the future, I will try to get some of those critique partners in the process earlier, but I kind of like that it's just 1, because my other critique partner is Kevin. He wants the full thing. I'm also having Damien read it for some sensitivity things. So they're gonna read it after that's done, but it's gonna be, again, before beta readers, because they are gonna read it from a craft perspective, but also just some reader response as well. So it's kind of an in the middle. So I have like my 1 critique partner, Cassidy, who's really just in there with it. Then Kevin and Damien, who will be secondary critique partners of the full product. Then I'll make any changes, then it'll go to beta readers. And with the beta readers, I am going to give very specific kinds of questions, things that I'm concerned about in terms of character development, motivation, tension, that kind of stuff. The way I want people to read it and get out of it, I want to make sure people are actually reading it and getting it that way, as opposed to giving me story ideas, right? Instead, it's more about the experience of reading it. You know, do you feel the tension here? Do you feel the pacing here is okay? That kind of stuff. Very specific things for them to think about. So that is my experience sort of figuring out what it means to have people read your work and what works and what worked. Because I feel like while it can be good to just wait until you have a full product to give someone the whole thing, you run the risk of losing energy, losing momentum, feeling stuck, feeling bogged down, because what critiques I got for Act 1 is helping me so much working on Act 2, where I was really stuck, you know, in that soggy middle stuff, you know? So I felt like it was super, super helpful to have that. So that is my experience, and my sort of recommendation is to not wait until you have a finished product and to really discern the difference between who your critique partners are and who your beta readers are. Now, I haven't picked my beta readers yet, but I feel like this should just be people who read your kinds of books. Or maybe it's someone who actually cares about you and wants to read your book. I think that's fine. They don't have to be writers of the same thing. Like, for example, I don't really write fantasy. I would love to someday, but I just really don't write it, and I don't even know if I ever could, but I read it. So I could beta read someone's fantasy book. I don't know that I would be a good critique partner for a fantasy book. It just depends. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, I want to read people, I want to use beta readers of people who would be like, huh, I'm interested in that book. I should try it. You know what I'm saying? Like, as if it was on the bookshelf and they would be the kind of person who would be possibly interested, because I want to know people who would consider buying this book, how do they experience it? Does that make sense? So what we kind of covered here is you got your alpha reader, which is usually like your spouse, your dog, your bestie, your neighbor, roommate, right? Where you kind of just throwing some stuff at them that has not been refined in any sort of way. And then, you know, you got your critique partners, who I think you should really think about who you're asking, because they are taking a fundamental part of the writing process with you. And I think that now you don't have to do like I did, like after act 1 to the midpoint, whatever. You can do it however, maybe just chapter by chapter, however, but I do think that at least one person should be intervening along the way, because then it prevents you from getting, like, let's say, because I'm gonna have 3 right before my beta, where I have 3 perspectives that are giving me all of these suggestions through the whole book, and then having to change the whole, it just feels very overwhelming, where I can make some of these changes ahead of time as I'm writing, if that makes sense. And then you have your beta readers. These are the think of these as your typical readers, who your audience is and would be, the people that would read, the people that would buy your book to get the experience of them reading your book. And you should give them questions in specific places. So maybe you're not sure about a certain chapter, so you have some questions at the end of the chapter. And I think what's really key, and Emily really emphasized this, I think Lindsay did too, don't let them write on the paper. You don't want them, you're not asking for line edits and developmental ideas. You're asking for the reader experience. You're giving them very pointed, specific questions for them to answer about their reading experience. Those are your beta readers. So that is my journey of letting people read my work, what I've learned along the way, and this new sort of revelation I've had by allowing someone into the process sooner and really kind of separating critique and beta, rather than just, here's the thing, tell me the thoughts, you know? Like, this is a lot more streamlined, I think, to get the kinds of things that you need in the right way at the right time. So yeah, that is my experience and my thoughts on getting feedback, critiquing, beta reading, etc., etc. So hopefully maybe that was helpful to you, or made you think about things or consider things differently, and maybe clarified things a little bit. But comment down below and let me know, did this help you? Do you do something similar? Do you do something different that was really helpful? Because I'm always looking for suggestions. And also, what has been your experience so far with feedback? Have you ever had people read your books? Or your work? What was that process like? You know, how do you go about it? How do you choose it? Let's have a conversation down in the comments, because I feel like this is really something that a lot of people have been talking about lately, and I love to hear everyone's thoughts on it, because it's really helped me and it's completely changed how I do stuff. So, all right guys, well, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget, this Thirsty Thursday on the 19th, we will be on my channel doing a live write-in at 7:30 p.m. So I hope to see you there. All right guys, thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.